producer of Natural Causes, a senior thesis piece that involves some rather nasty bashing in of one's head, and here is our actor Ed, who is going to have this side of his face cleaved by a piece of volcanic glass and stuff. So
obsidian.
Obsidian, thank you. So we actually have to cast a section larger than what the actual piece will have to look like, so that we have area that we can blend in. So for now, we're going to go ahead and put some release on the hair here, so that when we do the casting with the alginate, it doesn't yank all the hairs off of his face. And because we're only really concerned with from here down, we don't need to do a bald cap, but we are going to just pull the hair back a bit. Travis, you want to...
More tape.
Yeah, more tape. Man, your hair likes to stick down. You know, so just as high up on the back so it's not on his skin as possible.
So what?
Just a little bit of tape on his skin. Yeah, just so it stays, but it's not blocking too much.
It would be hilarious if Layman came over right now. Come over later.
So do a piece right here. And of course, for this, to protect his clothing, we cut out a plastic bag and taped it around his neck. We would normally do a larger casting than this, but all we need is that one side of his face, so this is all we're going to grab. Cool. Are you comfy?
Totally. Encased in plastic.
Yeah.
Sweating profusely.
You look terribly handsome. Terribly. Yeah. So, the release that I'm using for his face is actually a hair conditioning cream. It's called cholesterol. I know.
What is the cholesterol?
And
I need more of that.
just so that I don't have too much going on there, I just kind of get the sponge going on here on the back of my hand. This is like the best palette you could have for anything, because you can test out colors, spread things out, warm things up, and then when you apply, you just...
Have you done this before?
Yeah, hundreds of times, man.
Oh, good.
I'm a professional.
Yeah, we finally get to practice.
It's been a long time since I've gotten to do it, because I used to do this in Florida, and it's been like 11 years.
You had my confidence.
No. I'm still good. It doesn't go away. It's like riding a bike. Bike with no seat. And if you don't have this cholesterol stuff, which this is cheap, this was like $2, you can use petroleum jelly. That does a good release, but when you're done, it leaves a lot of that junk on the skin. It's kind of hard to get off. This stuff's pretty easy to remove.
You know what I'm thinking right now?
What are you thinking right now?
The suck cut scene from Wayne's World. This thing won't come off. You're like, oh, it's making my will to live.
Yes.
The Floby or whatever the hell it was. Suck cut.
My mom
Sucks
wanted one
while
of
it cuts.
It sure does suck.
those. You gotta keep your eyes closed.
Yeah. Dude.
You alright?
Yeah.
Okay. So that should be enough.
Does my ass, well, can my eye be shut when you smear it on me, or?
Oh yeah, when we put the stuff on.
I'm done at that point. So my eye's supposed to be shut.
Yeah, at that point, when we put on the alginate, you'll have it shut. Then we'll put plastic bandage over it, and once that sets, then we're just going to pull it right off and then fill it with plaster.
Alright.
Because unfortunately, the alginate starts shrinking when it starts losing water right away.
Oh, you gotta do it right then.
Yeah, I have to add plaster to it right away. I can at least do filling of the impression, and I could finish up the rest of the mold later, but you know, if we have the time, we can just pour the rest of it and sink it down in there and create the keys and everything, which I hope we can do.
Alright.
Okay, so we've applied the release. I'm going to take the alginate. And this is the Mulgel Sil-Free. It's a 7 to 8 minute set, but I'm going to actually use warm water so that you don't have like goosebumps and everything that are messing with the look of it, and it'll be more comfortable. This feels like that scene. Is it safe? Yes. No. What are you talking about? I have no clue. Is it safe? I love they did that in Gremlins too.
Yeah.
In the dentist scene.
Is it safe?
Warm water. And the powder.
That bowl big enough? It's gonna make a mess.
Oh, that's fine.
Right.
Yeah, it'll absorb quite a bit. So I'm gonna cut this bag. I want to fluff it first. I want to get it so that it is nice and airy because it's all packed down before. Okay. Okay, just gonna dump some in. Sorry about the powder coming up at your nose. I just want to work it in. Once I get it wet enough that it's not all bouncing up the powder, then I can really mix it, and I might even need to add a little bit more if it's too wet. Part of this video is a friend of ours, Shayla, who is getting into this stuff. She wants to see how it's done. She wasn't able to come tonight. She had other engagements. Okay, for this, when we put it on, we're going to spread it around, and then I'm going to have you just open your mouth just slightly, but have your teeth together, so we can get just inside your lips, because part of this appliance, I like it to look like we're breaking out your teeth in the process, so we'll add that to the sculpture.
Okay.
Go ahead and grab a little bit of it. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and close your eyes. Yeah. We're going to press it into all the detail on this side of the face. So do it on the side of the nose, into the mouth, and try to not trap any air pockets. Just smear it onto the skin so that there's no voids.
Leave my nostrils so I can breathe.
You only need one.
You're really professional. You learn to breathe through your ear or something, right?
Yeah. I think. Who is it that wears the most makeup in the movies? I can't think of my makeup.
Porn stars? Oh, it's minty. Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Ooh, oh, it is. That's cool.
So right now I'm preparing some plaster bandages. The alginate by itself isn't strong enough to hold its own shape.
Right.
And so just like when you get a cast when you have a broken arm, or at least how it used to be, they would wet this stuff out. It's got plaster in the fibers, and that allows it to set up. So I'm just going to create like a 4 or 5 layer piece here that's going to go over that. This one. Man, I tell you what, I can't wait until I have a garage or a studio or something again where I can do this legit, the way that I know I'm supposed to. It's a little half-assed, but it's good enough for my production, so, because I'll get what I want. And that's pretty firm, so that's ready to go.
Dude, this has way too much mint flavor.
Yeah. I don't think I'd use this again on somebody unless I absolutely had to.
I mean, it's cool. It's just really fiery.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to put some warm water in here. Okay. Now I take one of the stacks of plaster bandage I have, I run it through the water, and I use my knuckles to kind of activate the plaster, not really wringing it out, but just getting it all moist and homogeneous so that when I pull it like this, I've got plaster all over the sheet. So lay that on there. And just press it into the detail on here. Okay, and one more piece. And once again, I'm just kneading it, I'm not straining it out because we want to keep that moisture in there. Like that. One thing that makes this just a little awkward is it is just a portion of the face, so there's not as much area to lock this stuff into. And so I'm just trying to affix it to this alginate as best I can. You alright?
Yeah.
Okay.
How the hell do you do a whole face?
They do this everywhere.
You gotta breathe.
That's what straws are for.
No, we don't actually use straws anymore.
What do you use?
We actually have it pushed up to the edge of
Oh,
the
okay.
nostril.
So you're literally just breathing out of it. Okay.
Yeah, it's still open. It's just we get the material as close as we can because later on we can plug it and it will end up taking that shape properly.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so we're gonna let that set up. Doing okay, Ed?
Yeah, no, it's heavy. I can feel it's
Yeah.
lopsided.
And this is a buffalo spatula. I use it to mix with and also to contour molds with. It's a very handy tool.
Right here.
Yep. Let's see here. Oh, feel the outside is exothermic. It's warming up to bake itself.
Sweet.
Whoa.
Isn't that cool?
That's insane.
That's what the plaster does, is to set, it warms itself up.
Oh, so that's why the warm water rushed it so fast? Okay.
Hey, I'm still here.
Welcome back! Alright. So while we had the camera shut off, we were letting the plaster bandage set. It warms up and it becomes rock hard. Sorry. We took the pan that we did the wet out for that and we greased the bottom of it with some petroleum jelly so I can make the mold. We have a little bit of warm water in the bottom of this and we're going to go ahead and pull this off of him, and what he's going to do is I'm going to hold it and he's going to wiggle his face around, like make facial expressions. Go ahead. And that's going to loosen it up.
That worked the best. Squint really hard.
Yep. And
Wow.
there we go.
Whoa.
Whoa. My skin is so high right now.
And so now
Wow, so that's enough?
that's enough, because all I'm doing is right through here, making it look like they bashed your face in with a rock.
Okay.
Okay?
Wow.
So now we're going to mix up some plaster, and we're going to dab it into here and try our best not to trap any air bubbles. And just so that the plaster doesn't grab to the plaster bandage in there, I'm just going to lubricate that a bit. Of course, we'll record when we do a full face of the actress that's going to play our daughter victim, and that should go a little smoother because we'll have more room to do it and set up better and remember everything we're supposed to do right. Okay, so that's been lubricated. Clean off the brush, the petroleum jelly. Okay. And we'll go ahead and we'll take the water, and we always add the plaster to the water so that when it has enough, the surface of it should look like a dry riverbed.
Big spoon. That'd be better.
Yeah, that'll work better. Awesome. Okay. And I'm just dusting this in. I'm just get it in there a little bit so it absorbs. I don't want to dump a whole bunch in at a time, or else it has a hard time sucking up all the moisture into the plaster. I want all of this particles to get nice and wet. So that's the first one. You can see it sinking to the bottom. Getting real close now. You can see it just barely getting under the surface of the water. One more would do it. Let's see here. Okay, so if you look right in the areas that are sitting right on top as they absorb the water, they're creating little cracks in the surface, like a dry riverbed. That's when you know you have enough on there.
Okay.
There is no spoon. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start mixing it. My favorite way of mixing this stuff, if I had a bigger bowl, is by hand, so you can actually feel the lumps and squeeze them through your fingers to make sure that is nice and mixed and full. You know, you have a harder time telling with the spatula. And also, give a chance to, you know, spread it on the bottom, get the bubbles, you know, agitated out of it and stuff. Once I get this mixed up pretty well, I'll go ahead and tap it so that I can get most of those bubbles to the surface before I start wetting out in here with it. So I'm just tapping it a bit, giving the bubbles a chance to come to the surface and pop. You can see the bubbles are really coming up now. You know. And if I had like a shaker table, this would be awesome because it would just pull it out really, really fast. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and take a brush and we're going to start working into the surface. In fact, Travis, I can have you try that a little bit. I'll show you what I'm doing. So I'm just taking some of this. It's nice and, you know, kind of milky. And we're just tapping it into everything. And as I paint it in there, I'm just making sure that no bubbles are getting trapped. And I just slowly build it up and I just spread it around. And just try to stay on the blue.
Yeah.
Okay? Is this interesting, or?
Sure.
If you say so. And so besides doing your makeup, I have the girl's corpse, at least what you can see through the window of the fake coffin that I'm going to have to make out of steamer trunks. I just do like the you know, face, neck, and the hands. And then I also have to make a version of you that's all bones, but has the clothing like rotted over it and everything. Like nobody really cared how they buried your body. And I've been collecting bones from like going out to eat to kind of approximate certain things, like, you know, neck bones that are just like, you know, rib pieces that have cool shapes and stuff. And as long as I'm not showing too much of it, you can't tell that it's not chicken bones for fingers and stuff. Okay, and just keep on building it up that way.
Like just paint over or
Yeah. You're just doing a little bit at a time just so that you're not getting any bubbles in there.
Well, then you're going to pour the rest in there, right?
Well, you can actually, as you're doing this, feel the stuff start to thicken up, and it will be like a mousse, and you'll be able to pile it up.
Oh, okay.
And then once we get it to a certain thickness and it's thick enough as far as the mix, we can actually dump the rest into the bottom, turn that over on it, and sculpt a base for it.
Wow.
And it's funny, a lot of people, say, oh, I could never do this kind of stuff, and they don't realize probably about 90% of this is just process. Once you understand, what you're looking out for, what you need to get and stuff, it's not terribly artistic doing this part. It's like I can show anybody how to do it and have them do it all day and stuff. And there's like little tips and tricks for what to watch out for. Like you don't want to get your hand oils into the plaster because that degrades it. Depending on what kind of prosthetic you're going to make is what material you make your molds out of.
Now you did, well, that brush, if you're going to do this, get another brush, because there was residual
Vaseline on
it.
Yeah.
And that's no good for the water. That's oil.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily for this mold, I'm not doing a material that needs to be baked. Most molds that I would do would be for like foam rubber latex, where you have to whip up the latex with special chemicals so it makes a froth. You pour it into the mold, close it. It has a gelling agent that lets it set temporarily, but then you have to bake it for a number of hours so that it sets and becomes a spongy rubber that you can glue to somebody's face.
Oh, well.
And so the molds for that, you'd be a little bit more careful about what material you did it out of. Like I use UltraCal 30, which is a great plaster for that because it doesn't change dimensionally very much with temperature, and it holds great detail. And if I'm just doing like for this, what am I doing? Gelatin appliances. So this is like the oldest technology of appliances, is where you're taking like gelatin you would make jello molds out of and stuff, and you would actually just add glycerin and water, and it makes a very tough material that you can still have kind of stretchy, translucent, and you can paint it and glue it on somebody's face. So, okay, we're recording again. I think we eclipsed 12 minutes. Okay, what were we talking about for the past 10? No, but Travis is still building up onto the negative alginate of Ed's face. At this point, you can go ahead and wipe the brush off in the bowl, and then rinse it out, and we'll use the spatula to finish filling up. Just getting nice and thick now. What time is it?
11.
11. You can see it's really allowing it to pile up now. Did you want to try doing this part? Did you want to continue by doing this where you're holding it up? You can.
I'll watch you for a little bit.
Okay.
More beer.
Yeah, I want to make sure your priorities are taken care of.
He's got them straight.
And once again, Ed, you are awesome. You are super, super willing to help us out, and I love it.
It's
Thank
like
you.
Bingham behavior. Bingham.
Bingham.
Just like ketchup. It's called a Bingham fluid. Where it sits, see how it stands up, it sits solid, it'll maintain its shape, but if you perturb it, it'll flow. Has a non-zero intercept on the stress strain plot.
Kind of similar to like the cornstarch and water, only a little different. Yeah.
That's called rheopectic.
It sounds like something you need for when you have diarrhea.
Kind of, but rheopectic is a shear thickening, meaning the more you shear it, the thicker it gets. So under shear is like
Pressure. Or
how much it's being mixed, kind of. So if it's, you know, like when you're moving that blade very slowly, the shear is very low. But if you move it very fast, it's another great example of shear thickening is silly putty. You know, it flows, but if you take silly putty and you rip it really hard, it breaks.
Oh wow.
Same thing.
Okay.
You ever?
But the opposite of Bingham is, or rheopectic is thixotropic, which it's thixotropic is kind of like Bingham fluid, only it flows all the time. It's just a shear thinning fluid. The more you shear, the thinner it gets.
Are you sure about that?
I got a PhD in that kind of stuff.
All right.
That's why I know all that.
No, I'm messing with you.
Post-hole digger.
So I'm kind of coming back to this like an opposite direction where I'm considering, okay, if you want to make something cool for a movie, like some creature, some effect, something, the story needs it, right? They don't just pay you to make whatever you think is cool. It's like, you know, if they need Gollum, they hire somebody to make Gollum because Gollum is a character. Well, if I can create stories or find stories that have the elements that would be cool to create, and I'm the filmmaker, I can certainly be the one that has the effects made for that film based on what I find interesting. Just like with Peter Jackson and Weta, you know, he has a group that does all the cool shit he likes. He's like, I have an idea for this creature, and they draw it up, they sculpt it, they pull it, paint it, and dress somebody up in it and stuff, and it's his company, you know. So I want to be Peter Jackson. That's what I'm thinking. So you can see it's really thickening up now. Stuff, and maybe we'll get this last little bit on there. And this is a good build-up for when we would put it into another bit of plaster, so that, you know, if you have these little hooks, you can have more of like a mechanical bond to the new plaster. So you don't have to worry so much about if it's, you know, fresh, compatible, whatever and stuff. It will hold just because it has something to hold on to. So when this gets a little thicker, I'll just make these little like overhang hooks that will key into the new plaster.
So you're going to build that up even more.
Yeah, I want to have a flat base so that I can sculpt on there with no problem, and then have keys on it so that the new negative mold that I make off of the sculpture has a way of aligning to this so that, you know, they meet up the way they're supposed to. Okay, and you can even see now, you know, when I do it, it almost looks like it breaks, like it's creating little, you know, fissures and stuff that, you know, it's drying up. Okay, we're starting again. We're going to do the last part of the mold where we're actually going to fill in around the base of it so that we have more area to be able to key it into the other mold. We have kind of a change of venue. We finished up at Ed's house and we're now at my place. Now, the casting that came out of the alginate and plaster bandage mold came out like this, and because we were kind of rushed, there were a lot of little voids in there, little air bubbles and such, so when we do the plaster impression, it ended up all showing up in here. But that's okay because it's not inside the face, it's outside, so we can use a little plaster knife and just knock those off. Most of them want to come off on their own, and it's not going to destroy the detail too much. In fact, a lot of these areas are going to be underneath where the sculpture is, and so they wouldn't even be seen. It's mostly around the peripheral of the appliance that we'd be concerned about how well it blends in. But otherwise, just going to clean this up real quick. And it didn't go as far down on the lips as I would have liked, but I'll still be able to sculpt up onto the bottom lip, and it should end up being right through the eye, and then there'll be a fake eye on the side to look like it got pressed out. If I really needed to, if I needed more room, I can look at the direction that the planes of the face are going, and I could sculpt more of it into the mold and make kind of a fake extension of his face. And because that alginate was setting so fast, I think there was a little bit of deformation in parts of his face, but when I make the appliance, I can certainly either cut that off the back side of the appliance, or I can let it just press into his skin. Because his skin is soft through here, it'll just push in a little bit and it won't hurt the shape of things. And I'm cleaning up the edges to have a nice smooth transition between the casting of the face and the wall that I'll create with the plaster around it. And through here is where all of the tape was on his forehead, and that area I'm not concerned with at all because it was not planned to be part of the appliance area for sculpting, but I still need to clean it up just so that everything keys together well when I put the two halves of the mold together. And one thing you notice is I used that cholesterol stuff to release his eyebrows, but it still had some of the eyebrow texture in the mold, because we're not going to need that included with the sculpture. I'm just going to scratch these off, and they don't hold on very well because they're just barely on there, so we'll make it like he's got a bald eyebrow. I can do the same thing underneath the eyelid, because his eye is going to be completely covered when I put this appliance on him. And if I had a bald cap on him, I wouldn't have nearly as much to have to try to remove at the top. Nearly there. Just have to clean up this area through here and call it done. Alright, so that should be enough because we've gotten all the little junky bubble stuff off the surface. We've tapered off the edge, so now we'll have a nice clean edge around it when we pour our mold. Okay, so I cleaned the plaster out of the bottom of the bowl, and I've cut some pieces of clay. This is Roma Plastilina clay. This is what I would be using to actually sculpt the appliance onto the face. And what I'm going to use this as a mold wall because this will fit nicely at this end, and I just want to use half of this container to pour the last bit of the plaster for this. So that's got a nice square edge to it. I'll just use a spatula and square this guy off. Okay. I've got another piece. I'm going to try to square that off a little better. Okay. Let's see how much is there. Okay. And to support it down at the base behind it, I've got these strips I use for another mold, and I'll just press those in so that it holds it up. And this doesn't have to be perfect, it's just got to keep the plaster on this side when I pour it in. So, mainly this is about making a nice flat base for this, and also along the sides of the face I'll make these little ball keys out of clay so that the other side of the mold, once I make the sculpture, will be able to key into this mold. Make them nice and round. Normally I'd like to use like silicone keys that I've made ahead of time, but I don't have that right now. Or even like a bouncy ball works pretty good because you can just flex it out of the plaster. That'll work. Okay. And at the bottom of that, I'm just going to smear it in so that it has a nice little seal at the bottom. Okay, so that's sealed pretty good. Normally, I would use some Vaseline or spray this with some crystal clear Krylon spray to seal this, but because this is kind of a cheapy mold and I'm not going to be baking it, I don't care if a little bit of clay ends up in the side of it. So I am going to release it with a little bit of Vaseline though, so I'm going to stop this for a second. Okay, I'm going to use petroleum jelly. Okay, some on the clay wall. Okay, and I am going to mix up some plaster and then we're going to pour it. Just a second. Okay, so poured up some water and I'm going to start doing like I did before with the plaster, where I'm just going to be sprinkling it in, letting it absorb into the water. This without dumping it. Get out of there. Okay. Yay. Alright, so very old cup. I've had this for like years and years and years. And with plaster, you always want to add the plaster to the water. And with alginate, you could do alginate to water, water to alginate. Depends on your preference. With this, you always have to add the plaster to the water so that you can see the little crust that builds on the top when it's full. That looks like a dry riverbed. Back when I used to live in Florida and I would work out of my mom's garage, I had a huge trash can full of plaster, like the UltraCal 30 for doing the molds that I would bake out for doing foam rubber latex. I'd have white hydrocal, which is like a pottery plaster similar to this, so white plaster, and it's a little softer. It's a little better for doing the life casting because you can carve into it. It's like a temporary mold material so that you don't have to worry about it being able to handle temperature and some other stresses. But whenever you need to have a really tough mold, I would suggest like UltraCal 30. And there's even additives like Acryl 60, which is like a liquid glue that you mix with the water, and that helps bind the plaster even harder. So if you're concerned about baking your mold a whole lot of times, which some of these prosthetics on movies, they only have the one mold for the appliance, and so if you have to run that mold a lot of times because each time the actor wears it, they have to make a new piece. They don't get to reuse them. You have to have that mold go through a lot of heat and cool cycles, and that creates little stress cracks in the mold. We also, on molds like that, will add reinforcement, stuff to help the mold if it does start to crack so it doesn't just fall apart. A couple of popular ones is sisal fibers, which are like hemp fibers, and we make a little bird's nest of that and saturate it with plaster. Burlap, which is a very loose weaved fabric. That's a good one. It takes a long time to bake out the moisture in that though. And they even used to take like, you know, wire mesh similar to like, you know, chicken wire and embed that in there, but you know, because there's moisture in the mold, I wouldn't recommend it because it rusts over time. And one important thing about running foam latex in these kind of molds is that moisture, when you bake the foam latex in the oven, will start to steam out of the mold. And if your latex is in there and the steam is trying to push through your latex, it will create pockets and these little kind of bubbles in your appliance, and it will detach the skin on the outside of it and makes for a really horrible appliance. That is not something you want to put on an actor because you can't paint it. So this is almost done, and I want to do this one just a little thicker than the one I did for the face because I'm not having to fill in detail a little bit more than I need to. And let's see if I can bring this around and you can see. Let's see here. Zoom in there and focus. It's a little powdery, but through here there's some little cracks developing in the surface, and it's kind of like a dry riverbed, excuse me. Oh, especially back there, you can kind of see it really developing in the image. So it's pretty cool. One thing that's nice about plaster is it does have a nice long working time, and so you can have it be sitting for a little while and you don't have to really mess with it just yet before you'd have to pour it or anything. So I could let it sit, let it soak in a lot more, but I'm going to go ahead and start mixing it now. Okay, our buffalo spatula. I have a whole bunch of different sizes of this. And like I said before, if I was in a bigger container, I would want to have gloves on and mix this by hand so that all these big lumps I'd be able to feel when they've been worked out. Oops. I have to clean that up after. And it's not ideal to do this kind of stuff in the kitchen, except for, you know, it's probably the safest place to clean up in the house. At least I'm not doing it over carpet. Unfortunately, I have a garage here, but it's not the kind that has good lighting or electrical outlets and stuff, and climate control, so... So this is definitely feeling thicker than the last batch I did for the actual face. And just work some of these lumps to the edge and kind of flatten them out. Okay. There we go. And just like before, I'm going to tap this so that we can get some of those bubbles out. You can probably see it a little better this time, the bubbles that come to the surface. Probably annoying the crap out of my wife right now, but it's just temporary. I love you, baby. She didn't say I love you back, she's probably annoyed. Oh, she said she loved me back. big ones coming up. This isn't really crucial for this mold, but this is a good habit to get into. Just breaking bubbles. Okay, I'm going to let that sit a little bit, let the bubbles come up, and I'm going to clean up some of my mess, and then we'll start pouring. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and start getting some of this in here. It's still pretty liquidy, but that's okay, because I'm going to let it firm up inside of here. I'm just working it in a little bit at a time. I don't want to pour it, that'll trap big voids in it and stuff. I'll start filling it up. Normally I like to have containers that are pretty close to the size and shape of the mold that I'm trying to make. Sometimes I'll go to the dollar store and I'll buy those really cheap kind of cylindrical bowls and just cut the bottom off, flip it over onto a board and hot glue the edge so that nothing leaks out the bottom, and you can just peel the hot glue off when the mold is done. And it's reusable, which is awesome, the bowls. Break some of the bubbles as it goes in there. Okay. And as I'm lifting this stuff out, I can see there's still some lumps in there. You know, of course, if I mixed it by hand, I would feel that they were all broken up, but not too bad this time. And certainly, if this isn't enough plaster to reach the edges of the face, once I sink it down in there, I can mix up another batch and it should stick to it no problem. So I'll fill this up and see how I'm doing, and then I'll just ladle in around the face what is needed after that. I'm just working it into the corners. If I was really in a pinch and I didn't have a container or clay to, you know, make the walls for and stuff, which would be hard to believe that I'd be in that bad a shape, but I could wait until the plaster thickened up enough that it was like putty before it started to really get hot, and I could use like the spatula or like a aluminum kidney tool, and I could actually shape it on a board such that, you know, it is holding enough of its own shape that I'm able to make a nice smooth contour around it with the tools so that it'll stay up and it'll create the base that I want. But, you know, I try not to do that if at all possible. Get some of those big bubbles came out, you can see. Okay, and just scrape the sides, get as much out of there as I can. I can rinse off my glove, not a big deal. Okay. So now, because we have all these nice little undercuts on the other side of the face, I'm going to stick this in here and try to position it so that it's pretty much as flat as it can be in here, so I'm not having to push up too much on the material.
Oh, you thought that that's why TJ didn't want to, and then you thought I knew and that I supported that.
Okay, and I still have room around the sides to put those little round keys. I'm going to make a little bit more plaster so I can fill in this area that's not full. So. And one thing that I did while the camera was off is I tapped this quite a bit to get more of the bubbles out, and some is leaking out the back, so I stopped. Okay, and we got the nice little dry river bed stuff going on there. So, okay. And I'm just going to mix and pop the bubbles and stuff. So I'll stop the video because you've seen that already. Okay, so now I scooped some of this plaster that was getting too close to the edge away from the face. And then I'll carefully get some of this new plaster under the edge so that I don't have any voids underneath the head. As you can see, I'm building up to the tip of the nose, kind of filling it in so it's flush with the rest of the mold. And this is still pretty liquidy, so I can still move stuff around when it starts thickening up and really get this evened out so that it's not too bad. Also, when it's all done, anything that's sticking up over the top, I can knock it back down with a knife just like I did before. Okay, and so that I'm not wasting recording time, I'll go ahead and finish up this part and then I'll put in the keys for you. Okay, I just pushed in the 2 clay balls into there, and that's going to create a little recess in these points so that when it dries I can pull those out and the little void that's left will become a key, and so when I pour the plaster onto the top after sculpting the appliance, it'll have something that it can lock to so it doesn't rotate or shift. And yeah, it's best to have at least 3 of these. This is a smaller mold and I'm not as worried about it, but 3 is like a nice stable, you know, almost like, you know, 3-legged table sits the nicest. You don't have to level a foot, that sort of thing. So I'm still waiting for the plaster to finish getting a little thicker so that I can go ahead and finish smoothing out this edge. But as you can see, I built it up all the way around the face, and once I have that smooth and it dries, then I can take the plaster knife and just clean it up a bit once I pull it out of the plastic container. So we'll look at that when it comes out. Alright. Okay, so we've gotten to the point where it is warmed up, exothermed, it's nice and firm now, so we should be able to demold it. And I had enough extra from the last little bit that I put in here that I put some back into the alginate. Now, normally we wouldn't do this late, this is from the other day when I did the face casting, and the alginate shrinks, especially wherever it's thinnest, so this isn't an accurate impression anymore. But I didn't get to show you guys the demolding of this, which, you know, there's our plaster bandage mother mold that held the alginate stiff. And Shayla can play with this as far as sculpting, so it just peels off. As you can see, this stuff is very rubbery. And it's a throwaway mold, you know, both these parts would be trash at this point. And of course I can just take this, clean it up again, and she'd have something to sculpt on. But it wouldn't be nearly as accurate as this would be. So at this point, I'm going to pull clay away. As you can see, it leaked out the back a little bit with the plaster. And I'll just flex this a little bit, and we had the petroleum jelly on the bottom, so now it lets go really nicely. And we can see on the bottom, nice smooth flat surface so that we can just lay it down, sculpt right on it. I'll trim up the edges to clean it up. And these guys pop out. And we have our nice little voids for being able to key into the top mold. You can see that. So normally I would have a full face casting if I was doing a prosthetic again. Even if it's on one side of the face, having the full face, you can see how that sculpture fits into the look of the entire makeup. In this case, because I know exactly what I need to put on here, and I don't want to create the extra steps of having a full face, creating a smaller mold just like this one of just the area where I sculpted on the full face, and then making a mold of that sculpture, I'm just skipping those steps and I'm sculpting directly on this partial mold. Because when you design a makeup and you have the full face, you can say, okay, as far as where the nose is and the eyes and all that kind of stuff, if I sculpt through here, I can see exactly how the whole face is going to look with that sculpture on it. And we do what's called a float off, where we have a kind of like a soap underneath on the stone that's soaked in and dried. And when you sculpt on top of that, when you're ready to take that sculpture off and put it on a smaller mold, you take the whole face that has that sculpture and you dunk it into ice cold water. And what that does is it activates that soap that's in the skin of the mold, the casting of the face, and allows it to separate the clay from the surface. So you float it off, set it aside, try not to damage it, make your little sectional mold, you know, that only has a little bit further than what the sculpture needs as far as the edges. And you can take the sculpture, set it on there, it'll key right into it because it's the same shape. And then you blend the edges out and you finish up the sculpture as best as it's going to be for casting. And of course we skipped all that. So I'm going to clean this up. It's going to be a nice mold for sculpting, and when we get to that point where I'm going to sculpt the prosthetic, then you'll get to see that. So that's it for now. I'm going to edit this video together, and hopefully you guys enjoy it and stuff, and some people learn something out of it. Great. Alright, see you later.